Good evening, and welcome to a private showing of 3 paintings, displayed here for the first time. Each is a collector's item in its own way, not because of any special artistic quality, but because each captures on a canvas, suspends in time and space, a frozen moment of a nightmare. Our initial offering, a small Gothic item in blacks and grays, a piece of the past known as the family crypt. This one we call simply the cemetery. Offered to you now, 6 feet of earth and all that it contains. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Night Gallery. Objet d'art number 2, a portrait. Its subject, Miss Claudia Menlo, a blind queen who reigns in a carpeted penthouse on Fifth Avenue, an imperious, predatory dowager who will soon find a darkness blacker than blindness. This is her story. And now, the final painting. The last of our exhibit has to do with one Josef Strobe, a Nazi war criminal hiding in South America. A monster who wanted to be a fisherman. This is his story. Welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, to an exhibit of art, a collection of oils and still lifes that share one thing in common. You won't find them in the average salon or exhibition hall or art museum. Painting number 1, its title, The Dead Man. An interesting meeting between flesh and bone, between that which walks and that which, you should excuse the expression, gets buried. So we submit for your approval this and other frozen moments of nightmare placed on canvas. Painting number 2. Something on the abstract side to annotate that which is not abstract at all. Greed, avarice, and man's constant hunger to change what he doesn't like by whatever means. Said means in this case being a little science mixed with a little black magic. Welcome, if you will, the housekeeper. A very hearty welcome to Night Gallery and to a collection of art not found in your average museum. These are paintings which represent life, but occasionally death as well. Case in point, this canvas here. A bedroom, but with all the cheer and warmth of a crypt. Beneath the paint and the patina is an ingredient called jealousy. Color it a monstrous green, and call the picture Room with a View. For your approval now, a painting which has to do with time. Not the brief moments left to our culprits in the previous story. Their years of imprisonment were minute little fragments compared to the time we talk of in this picture. We talk centuries now, and what happens when men from one century send back items quite unbidden to men of another. We call this painting The Little Black Bag. This offering is a landscape, lunar and low-keyed. Suggestive, perhaps, of some of the question marks that await us in the stars, and perhaps pointing up the moment when we'll collect something other than moon rocks. This item is called The Nature of the Enemy. A most hearty welcome to those of you whose tastes in art lean toward the bizarre. Our first painting submitted for your approval is an item of real estate, but you won't find it advertised in the classifieds. Oh, it's light and comfortable and altogether well heated, but there's a chill to the place. So bundle up when you look at this one. Our painting is called The House, and this is the Night Gallery. The least permanent, the most fleeting of man's proof of existence, his shadow. It comes and goes with light, hours of the day, point of the sun, angle of the moon. It is a quickly daubed and imperfect outline of a certain object at a certain given moment. This painting is called Certain Shadows on the Wall. On display this evening, a pastiche of painting from Oddball Land. The poet Sir Max Beerbohm reflected that no one ever died of laughter. Object of brush and palette, the rebuttal. The clown is Jackie Slater, his occupation, a comedian. His aspirations to collect funny bones and hang them on the walls of his life to hide the cracked plaster and yellowed wallpaper that is part of the interior decoration of failure. Poor Jackie Slater. A bad joke told in a foreign language in an empty hall. The comic unable to coax laughter. The painting is called Make Me Laugh, and this lifeless limbo is called The Night Gallery. Our second painting this evening has to do with the stalker and the victim, the hunter and the hunted. That rare breed of Homo sapien whose love of butchery is not a sport but a consuming passion. Offered to you now, clean kills and other trophies. Welcome, art lovers. We offer for your approval a still life, if you will, of noise. A soundless canvas suggestive of sound. The mouth belongs to Pamela. In life, a shrieking battle axe made up of adenoids, tonsils, and sound decibels. In death, an unmuted practitioner of fishwifery, undeterred and ungagged by what one would assume to be the great silencer. Some ghosts come back to haunt. Others come back simply to pick up where they left off. Our painting is called Pamela's Voice, and this is the Night Gallery. An unforgiving sea usually buries its secrets beneath itself. Warships and ocean liners, treasured galleons and submarines turn into rusting relics inside a watery locker, lost to memory. But occasionally there comes a floating, unbidden reminder of disaster, like this lifeboat. The painting is called The Lone Survivor. We'll put it in tow and see where she came from and why. We move now from ships like the Titanic and the Andrea Doria to a small fragment of history. This little collector's item here dates back a few hundred years to the British Indian colonial period, proving only that sometimes the least likely objects can be filled with the most likely horror. Our painting is called The Doll, and this one you'd best not play with. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to an exhibit of the eerie and the oddball. Our first offering this evening, faces. Paint, pigment, and desperation. The quiet desperation of men over 40 who keep hearing footsteps behind them and are torn between a fear and a compulsion to look over their shoulders. The painting is called They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar. Welcome, art lovers. We offer for your approval a painting which has to do with what happens to men who take a walk into nature's marketplace and exchange certain powers for other powers. The blind, we're told, for example, develop an extraordinary sense of touch. In this case, the story of a man who perfects the art of killing. Our painting is called The Last Laurel. You're most welcome in this particular museum. There's no admission, no requirement of membership, only a strong and abiding belief in the dark at the top of the stairs, or things that go bump in the night. Example, tonight's first painting. Small boy encased in a crystal ball, born with a very special gift. He can prophesy. But you'll wonder, as we look behind that picture, if a prophecy is always a gift, or can it on occasion take the form of a nightmare? The painting's title is The Boy Who Predicted Earthquakes, and this is the Night Gallery. concept of medical transplants is exciting indeed. But the story behind this painting takes the concept a step further, or if you will, a step over, into a different kind of world. One in which a gentleman named Lackland finds a hand that is not his own, and he finds it at the end of his wrist. Our painting, The Hand of Borges Weems. How nice of you all to come to our little exhibition. To the connoisseurs amongst you, those tasteful few who take their art seriously, we acknowledge with no apologies that you won't find the works of the masters here. Because in this particular salon, we choose our painting with an eye more towards terror than technique. A little American Gothic here, with the accustomed accoutrements to mourning, tombstones and tears, and the somber look of the bereaved. We generally cry at funerals out of a sense of loss. A poor, unfortunate loved one who will no longer walk the earth. He or she will simply occupy 6 feet of it, never to be seen or heard from again. Or at least we make an assumption that that's natural law, and we subscribe to it. But this painting here, and we admit this up front, breaks that law. It's called A Death in the Family. It offers up a new view of death, and it introduces you to quite a family who live here in the Night Gallery. A most unusual graduation exercise now. It's titled The Class of '99. A set of numbers and a pair of eyes. We'll move behind them now to give you an idea why we call the place you're in the Night Gallery. For those of you who've never met me, you might call me the undernourished Alfred Hitchcock. The great British craftsman and I do share something in common. An interest in the oddball, a predilection toward the bizarre. And this place is nothing if it isn't bizarre, by virtue of the paintings you see hanging around me. This item here is called Since Aunt Ada Came to Stay. And Aunt Ada is a most memorable character. You may not like her, but I seriously doubt if you'll ever forget her. Be thankful you've met her only in the Night Gallery. We refer to him by different names. Lucifer, Mephistopheles, Beelzebub. But by any other name, he'd smell of brimstone. These the ingredients to a one-man stew, a disc jockey, a radio show, and a painting we call The Flip Side of Satan. Good evening. We welcome you to this palladium of art treasures that range from the kooky to the uncommon, from the bestial to the bizarre. And I'd like to take you on a guided tour through the Night Gallery. A collection of paintings on display for only the most discriminating, because it's best that they be seen both after and in the dark. The story behind this offering, a word which we've coined just for the occasion, arachnophobia. It means for our purposes a special distaste for those crawly little beasties with the multi-legged hairy bodies. In other words, a fear of spiders. The title of our first painting in this, the Night Gallery. Item number 3 in the Night Gallery. We call it marmalade wine. Look at it, if you will, with gentle and restrained eyes. The way you'd look at a maniac in the woods. Because that's the story it tells. Hold out your glasses and get ready for a very special nightcap. A small item for the pedagogues amongst you. A little something to be found in the drawer alongside the old school ties. A picture, if you will, a very special school where the students don't matriculate, but rather are marooned. Where the scholars are not enrolled, but rather sentenced. The painting is called The Academy. Good evening. We offer you an evening sojourn amongst the wild, the woolly, the unbelievable, sometimes made believable, as our first painting suggests. From this picture, one wouldn't necessarily conjure up the story of love, but that's precisely what it tells about. The emotion as old as man, but the object of the emotion, this is not quite as familiar. Its title, Phantom Farmhouse, offering number 1 in the Night Gallery. For our last offering in the Night Gallery, a painting that brings to life a literary classic. From the pen of Conrad Aiken, fragile, lovely, haunting. Its title, Silent Snow, Secret Snow. Good evening, and welcome to the Night Gallery. Now, if you'll just follow me. Time again for your weekly excursion into the cultural. Painting, statuary, still lifes, collages, some abstracts, and some items in ice. That's not the technique. That hopefully is what we turn your blood into. A good way to begin the attempt, painting number 1. About a man who spends a night in a haunted house. An unbeliever, if you will, who by dawn believes. The name of the painting is A Question of Fear. The name of this place is the Night Gallery. Oscar Wilde said something to the effect that if there were not a devil, we'd very likely invent him. He serves many a purpose, and this grim-visaged character here is proof of that rather bitter pudding in a story that tells what happens when evil collides with evil. The painting is called The Devil Is Not Mocked. A most cordial welcome to this nocturnal arcade, featuring canvases that are sometimes a bit on the peculiar side, sometimes uncommon, sometimes a few frescoes of the freakish. Tonight's first selection, a painting suggesting solitude, or at least solemnity, as viewed during the midnight hour. It tells a tale of 2 young people caught inexorably in a recurring nightmare, with a finale on the jolting side. Our painting, with the somewhat familiar face, is called Midnight Never Ends, and this is the Night Gallery. There's something rather remarkable in the scope of imagination peculiar to children. They project and dream and fantasize with beauty and simplicity and faith in a manner that somehow eludes us as we grow older. This is Brenda, and Brenda has a playmate. It comes to her in part because of loneliness. And what I wish for you is that you never get that lonely. Good evening. A most cordial welcome to a display of canvases from what you might call the Mausoleum School of Art. Subject, a common enough item utilized by teenagers and tycoons. The daily journal in which we notate the happenings of our day-to-day existence. But in this instance, a unique periodical that doesn't record what was, but rather predicts what will be. Its title, The Diary. It's our initial offering in the Night Gallery. Our painting reminds us that there's a strange fascination to digging holes alongside ancient oaks. You give the average man a shovel and an X on a map, and the fantasies come thick and fast. Pirate gold, hidden Confederate treasure, and sometimes the unexpected, and sometimes the unwelcome. Hence the title, Big Surprise. Our final offering, a study in depth of a gentleman from the academe, seen here at the lectern, delivering a most scholarly treatise. This particular class, I don't think you'd want to cut. The painting's title, Professor Peabody's Last Lecture. Good evening, art lovers. For your enjoyment and edification, 3 paintings on display. Part of a collection of kookery unique to this special exhibit. Painting number 1. Out of the real estate section of a ghost town weekly. A gingerbready item quite appropriately called House with Ghost. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Night Gallery. As our third selection, an item from the past, that uniquely American institution known as the pitchman, the wheeler and dealer of magical nostrums, guaranteed to cure, to palliate, to bring back the glow of health to everything but a cadaver, Mottled dreams, if you will. Our painting is called Dr. Stringfellow's Rejuvenator. Drink hearty. Our final selection this evening, an import from that other region, that infernal inferno down below, offered to you now in living color and with a small scent of sulfur. Our painting is called Hell's Bells. Good evening, and welcome to Night Gallery, a potpourri of paintings slightly tilt and left of center, as is the case with our first selection. This picturesque background is rural America. Its central figure, a young school teacher. But this is where the commonplace ends. You're about to join a roster of students in a learning experience quite without precedent. The painting is called Dark Boy, and this particular repository is called the Night Gallery. I presume that most of you, in moments of weakness or in spasms of compassion, have picked up a hitchhiker. The story behind this item here has to do with a man who stops his car and invites a stranger in. And such a stranger. The kind that makes you wish you'd taken the bus or stayed in bed. Its title, Keep in Touch. We'll think of something. H.P. Lovecraft, known to the aficionados of the occult, demonology, witchcraft, as a master storyteller, is responsible for our first selection in this museum of the frequently morbid. To you connoisseurs of the black arts, you'll probably recognize it. It's a painting that tells the story of a young artist who recruits his models from odd places, and the models are very odd indeed. The painter's name, incidentally, is Pickman. The title is Pickman's Model. And where else would you see a story like this except in the Night Gallery? We're all familiar, I suppose, with mediums and seances, the slightly curdling nocturnal event in which the dead come back to visit through the good offices of a middleman or woman. It's a sport that lends itself to table tappings, some ghostly manifestations that float transparently across the room, and a few distant sepulchral voices. This painting offers a new side to the familiar seance, because it tells what happens when a seance is successful, but the appearing dead isn't the one expected. Offered to you now on the Night Gallery, The Dear Departed. And now, Night Gallery's slightly distorted version of history, an act of chivalry. To the shoppers, the hunters, the sifters and the winnowers, to those of you who comprise that vast fraternity of picture watchers, we offer you this salon of the special and the supernatural. Painting number 1. It has to do with death, usually the last chapter in every man's book of life. The ashes and the dust, the tomb, and the engraving on the stone. Death, the finale. But our first painting offers up a tale with the final curtain not quite the final curtain. There's an epilogue. We offer you now a little item called Cool Air, tonight's first painting in the Night Gallery. We branch out a bit this evening and move a few feet away from the usual and get into the area of photography. Now, this painting here had best be viewed in a dark room because it conjures up the ghostly, the ghastly, and the ghoulish. It tells the story about a very remarkable device that offers up a vision as things are and a hellish vision of what they were and shall be. Our painting is called Camera Obscura. From the pen of Edgar Allan Poe, more or less, quoth the Raven. Good evening. Of course, you're all here by invitation, but don't let it disturb you if these paintings per se don't happen to be your thing. These are rather special paintings, the kind of hanging generally put up with a noose. This painting, for example, is of a rather special world. What has become perpetuated in the language as the ghetto, that dismal realm of pushcarts and poverty, where hopes are stamped down like dirty shoes on snow. Death is a commonplace visitor to these somber alleys, but occasionally someone else visits. Our painting is called The Messiah on Mott Street, and this place, should you not already know it, is the Night Gallery. We, all of us, have a kind of fascination for mirrors. There's a most appealing mystery to what is on the other side of the looking glass. And occasionally we turn into Alice. Our last selection in tonight's gallery, a very special looking glass, and it's called The Painted Mirror. The name of this place, should you have come in here accidentally out of the rain, is the Night Gallery. We deal in paint, pigment, light and shadow, realism, surrealism, impressionism, and ghost stories. Item number 1 over there. It could be a gentleman sitting in an electric chair, but it isn't. What it depicts is, in a sense, a method of execution that we humans reserve for other humans who happen to be dissimilar to us. You're about to look under that hood and meet firsthand one of the different ones. Tonight's first excursion into the realm of the unusual. Jealousy is what we normally paint green, and jealousy provides the springboard of this particular painting. It offers up the bottom line of what can happen to human beings when trust is wiped out by suspicion. At this point, it ceases to be just a kind of titillating tale of human comedy. It becomes what it is, a horror story. Our painting is called Tell David. Item number 3 in the Night Gallery. You probably recognize this quaint figurine. The dead eyes, the sewn lips, the kind of thing that usually infests nightmares. And that happens to be precisely what it is, a nightmare of the first order. It's titled Pagoda's Heads. Good evening. Please come in. These little objets d'art that you see surrounding me, you won't find in your average art museum, because these are unusual paintings and statuary that come to life or death, whatever the case may be, because this is the Night Gallery. For the horticulturist amongst you, here's a dandy. A lady who plants things and then steps back and watches them grow. Roses, rhododendron, tulips, and things never before to be found coming out of the ground, just put in. The subject of this painting has green fingers. Funeral home art, you might call it. Example, this item here. The somber silence of shrouds, the gray, unhappy light of a sunless dawn, and a horse-drawn casket, very much in keeping with the motif of this place. The title of the painting, Funeral. We don't ask you to believe this particular painting, Death's Head hovering over a jukebox, but it does point out the all-inclusive quality of the occult. Phantom specters can be found not only in haunted houses, but in places you'd least expect to find them. Places like this. Our painting is called The Tune in Dan's Cafe. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. We offer up hopefully salutary, possibly educative, but certainly a few terrifying little items in this, the mausoleum of the malignant. An art house full of bogies, elves, pixies, bad fairies, and a few demoniac inhabitants, all put together for your pleasure and titillation in what we call the Night Gallery. Painting number 1, having to do with fishermen and what they fish for, or more specifically in this case, a fisherman and what he wasn't fishing for. What appeared in his net one afternoon defies logic, reason, and belief. But there it was, Lindemann's Catch. A dead man splattered on a concrete walk. Not the most appetizing of scenes and not the pleasantest of stories, but if you're interested remotely in homey homicides, this may be your bag. We call it The Late Mr. Peddington. In the general generic area of costume jewelry, note girl and note expression. Obviously a lady much disturbed by whatever little bauble she has recently been the recipient of. A said sentence improperly ending on a preposition. But this story ending on a much more deadly note than that. We call it A Feast of Blood. Good evening. In another world inhabited by ghouls, goblins, gremlins, and the generally grotesque, it's occasionally possible to put this sundry and myriad crew on canvas. And this we do in this arcade of the outrageous. Painting number 1. A small item of hope and faith and despair. An excursion into the eerie in which we touch base with that fraternity of the dispossessed who seek out something miraculous in the way of cures and in the way of hope. Our painting is called The Miracle at Camafeo, and it's offering number 1 in this, the Night Gallery. A bit of gossamer and lace, as befits a beautiful woman, fragile and ephemeral, in keeping with the soft mystery of the female. But to the gentlemen amongst you, who, like all your male predecessors since the beginning of time, have been mystified and miffed by a female counterpart, this one's for you. A beautiful lady in a strange house, also inhabited, alas, by the ghost of Sorworth Place. Felicitations and greetings from this cavern of canvases, dedicated and devoted to bringing you art lovers a few in-depth probes through the crust of the not quite real, the almost real, and the frankly and flagrantly unreal. Pictures, paintings, portraits, rendered onto canvas with brush and sometimes claw. Item number 1. In a $12.50 pine box reposes the body of a frontier Frankie, armed but disarming. A victim of an Old West philosophy that any man with a good eye, a limber finger, and a well-honed trigger skirts the pastures of immortality. But this chap found out the hard way that immortality is a wish, a word, but infrequently a reality. He awaits your pleasure in a painting we call The Waiting Room. To those amongst you with a predilection toward antique collection, or the occasional bargain hunting that takes place in out-of-the-way nooks and stalls, this painting suggests a certain required wariness when it comes to your shopping. Because there are moments when behind some dusty book or in a cobwebbed corner of an ancient vestibule, you'll uncover a little object d'art which can horrify the heck out of you. Such being the case in this painting, when a lady goes junking about and uncovers a mythological statue that has lived past its time and intrudes on hers. We call the painting The Last Rites for a Dead Druid. Good evening, and welcome to an art museum of the unique. Paintings offered up that infrequently find themselves hung in the more prosaic places. Paintings that are frequently as much formaldehyde as they are pigment. So upon viewing, if you sense a touch of the grave, the morgue, the concrete slab, count yourself more or less normal in terms of your taste in art, at least this art. Number 1 entry. A painting that suggests a story replete with gaslight, hansom cabs, and cadavers. An all-star cast of corpses appearing in what we call deliveries in the rear, delivered to you now on Night Gallery. Painting number 2 in the Night Gallery. addressing itself to the strains and stresses of the married, having to do with the fact that there is more than one way to kill a cat, and more than one way to dispose of a wife. Our painting is called Stop Killing Me. Here we have a cameo dandy. Problem, how to flee the coop, how to make tracks away from the police and unhappy peers, ship out to safer climes. The story of a chap who, if he'd had it to do over again, would have remained where he was. He finds out that he is precisely what is the title of the picture, Dead Weight. Good evening. If you seem to sense an aura of cold dampness that permeates this room, attribute it not to either defective air conditioning or inclement indoor weather. It's simply because this is rather a special place, with special statuary and special paintings, and they carry with them a coldness that seems to go best in a crypt or in a place like this, called the Night Gallery. Our opening kickoff is deep into the end zone of the moors, where hounds bay and witches fly brooms, and the belief in the supernatural is as natural as breathing, or not breathing. We call this item, I'll Never Leave You, Ever. Our next painting tells the story of a young man whose major in school is philosophy, but whose extracurricular labors take him into the area of black magic. And for this, you don't get a degree, but the commencement ceremony is a gas. See for yourself as we offer you There Aren't Any More McBains. Good evening. I'm your tour guide through this unusual salon of unusual statuary and paintings. These are the sort of things that may not please you, but very likely may chill you, because this is the Night Gallery. Now this one here, unabashed and unashamed, I submit to you as a dandy. It delves into an ancient funeral rite having to do with a personage called a sin eater, one who attends a wake and partakes of the funeral food, and in the process digests all the transgressions of the deceased, so that he departs the earth a much cleaner and sweeter little item, proving that we've become a bit more sophisticated in our tribal rites, but we are much the poorer for our 20th century chromium intellect. You might agree with me after you've seen Sins of the Fathers. Offered to you now, an item having to do with labor and management. An employment office, where is offered a collection of potential employees whose skills are unique. For in addition to their loyalty, industriousness, punctuality, and impeccable cleanliness, they also run at least 100,000 miles without a lube and an oil change. It's no wonder we call this one, You Can't Get Help Like That Anymore. Good evening. I'm your little old curator in this museum which we call the Night Gallery. There are horror stories and horror stories, elements of terror that take myriad forms. But this item has a built-in terror which can refrigerate even the most dispassionate amongst us. It has to do with a little beastie known as an earwig. A small bug that crawls into the human ear. And while inside, it doesn't whisper sweet nothings. It performs quite another function. Offered to you now on Night Gallery. A brand new nightmare, which we call the caterpillar. Our next painting on Night Gallery tells the story of an illusion, an invisible specter which guides and motivates and drives. And though you will never see her, this childish wraith, you'll know she's there. And we venture to suggest that you'll be chilled by the knowledge. Our painting is called Little Girl Lost. We're delighted that all of you could make it this evening because we have something special on tap. In the area of the occult, it's customary to preoccupy ourselves with witches. And too infrequently, we dabble on the male side of that time-honored profession, the sorcerer. On display here is a painting showing the natural habitat of this species of black art practitioner. Dark alley, murky light, a few sundry skulls, and the gentleman himself on the right of the picture with the upraised hand and the funny little goat horns. Yes, indeed, this is a sorcerer. And for those of you who disbelieve his existence, we invite you to check this out for a little while. Our painting is called The Return of the Sorcerer, and where better place for him to return than right here in the Night Gallery. Good evening. Let me welcome you to this parlor of paintings. We offer them to you for your enjoyment and edification. Feel free to dwell on them at your leisure and in your own good fashion. But kindly don't touch, because here they frequently touch back. Our #1 painting in tonight's exhibit, this intriguing portrait of a young lady, curiously photogenic and hauntingly familiar. Recall seeing this face? You've seen it. On billboards and magazine ads, on television commercials. Oh, yes, you've seen it. But there are people who, having seen it, wish they hadn't. Our painting is called The Girl with the Hungry Eyes. And should I have failed to mention it, this is the Night Gallery. As the resident custodian of this museum, I bid you welcome and offer you the felicitations of our entire staff, most of whom are out and about at the moment, since they tend to be night people. Our artists and artisans take a rather pardonable pride in their work that you see hanging here. An example is this item here. It's called Rare Objects and represents that potpourri of collector's items that some men are prone to acquire. But there are collector's items and collector's items. Offered to you now an excursion into the very strange. Tonight's offering in the Night Gallery. Good evening, and a cordial welcome. For you aficionados of the arts, we offer you paintings that run the gamut of the human experiences, and a few of the inhuman experiences. Our paintings are in oils, watercolor, acrylic, charcoal, and occasionally formaldehyde. Case in point, this painting here. It's called Spectre and Tap Shoes, having to do with the nearly lost art of tap dancing. A said terpsichorean pursuit taking on an intriguing dimension when the dancer happens to be a ghost, as is so often the case in the sort of thing that you view in the Night Gallery. For the benefit of those of you who have not visited art lovers' soirees before, I am your guide, host, and curator. I introduce the hanging goodies with just a few words of explanation as to how we secured them for our exhibit. Sometimes a loan, sometimes a direct purchase, frequently a shovel. Tonight we offer you the sour fruit of a scientist's failure. For there are apparently some things that can't be accomplished. And therein lies the tale and hangs the picture. In this, the Night Gallery. Take your positions, if you will, now. The camera's ready, and smile, please. Time again for your weekly sojourn in the nether regions, where we offer you paintings hopefully proving that insomnia is much to be desired over somnolence. For better a wakeful night than an unwelcome dawn, if you will. All of which is perhaps a slightly agonized invitation to keep your eyes open here. We offer you paintings like this one, a graphic illustration of one of the most persistent and eternally recurring nightmares, shared all too commonly by all of us. That fear of being helplessly trapped in some inescapable circumstance, and with it the hope that we can discover an exit. The title of this painting is The Other Way Out, and it poses the question, is this trip desirable? Because this is the Night Gallery. We're truly delighted that you've come. I mean, anyone can go to the movies or a night doubleheader or a discotheque or what have you, but only the tasteful visit a place like this. Their taste, of course, must of necessity run toward the slightly odd, or at the very least, the bizarre. That's what we deal with here, the bizarre. The expected, unexpected, if you will. As in the case of this painting here. It's called Fright Night, featuring that beloved star of stage and screen. The name eludes me, but there is, you'll note, a familiarity about it. Actually, this fiery apparition is the sort of thing that appears in strange houses, because that's what this painting depicts, a very strange house. And you're welcome to share it with us, because this is the Night Gallery. Good evening, sports fans. In discerning circles, I'm known as the Howard Cosell of the crypt. Which is to say, I'm more or less a professional practitioner of art that tells a story. And stories that dabble in themes that don't lend themselves to dinner conversation. Now, here you have a study in penology. Man imprisoned by his fellow man. Caged in a barred cubicle and left alone far too long to contemplate both his sins and his sanity. This painting is called Finnegan's Flight. It touches upon prisons, hypnosis, and the soaring wings of imagination. But as to the latter, a small warning. Imagination can be a double-edged thing. It can take you out of the humdrum realities, but it can also fly you to a place much less pleasant. May I introduce to you now Mr. Finnegan in his first and last appearance in the Night Gallery. Lest you be turned off by the dim light and the somber mien of this place, let me reassure you that there is nobody here but us art lovers. I'm your tour guide in a place designed to show you the beauty of the unexpected. Our conception of beauty may be a bit different than the norm. For example, some might see something attractive in a goldfish. We, on the other hand, find nothing lovelier than a piranha. Now, this canvas here, dark hallway, door slightly ajar, a rather disquieting red room at the end of the hall, and a very large cat. We suggest to you that while felines may look cute and cuddly and playfully mischievous, our suggestion is that you feed them a bit of milk and get rid of them, because cats are and always have been Satan's familiars. Our painting title is She'll Be Company for You, and it's hung in this place we call the Night Gallery. Good evening. I might offer this small admonishment if you happen to be a purist in your judgment of art. These are not your ordinary canvases. You don't find Monet in a mausoleum or a Van Gogh in a graveyard. This item here, commentative on what A.J. Liebling referred to as the sweet science, obviously having something to do with the manly art of self-defense, boxing. But if the Marquis of Queensberry mayhem doesn't particularly turn you on, don't turn this off. This painting tells a story infinitely more intriguing than a couple of fast boys mixing it up. It's called The Ring with the Red Velvet Ropes, and it tells you the tale of precisely who is the real heavyweight boxing champion of the world. And I think you'll be surprised. Surprise happens to be our stock in trade, because this is the Night Gallery. Good evening. On behalf of the management, I'm authorized to tell you that your presence here gives them great pleasure. They'd all be here to greet you personally, if not for prior commitments. Several are attending funerals and would have been here if it weren't so difficult to get out of the box, which should give you some idea as to the nature of our art. Now, this painting, for example, Stairway Inspector, Cobwebs and Darkness, it's called Something in the Woodwork. It tells of what one might look for when purchasing a house, because that creak you hear in the dead of night is not always an errant rafter. Sometimes if you walk up those attic steps, you'll find yourself face to face with the very thing that goes thump in the night. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Night Gallery. We offer you both tricks and treats in this special realm where the national dish is pumpkin, national flower is wolfbane, and our national anthem is the Funeral March, which should give you some definitive idea as to the nature of this place. We show paintings like this one, in a color scheme of blood-red sky with corpse-white moon. This, we tell you up front, is a story of vampires. And, of course, this must conjure up images of Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee, somewhat frigid, malevolent, monstrous creatures. But reserve such all-conclusive judgment of the living dead until you hear the story of a particular vampire, the kind you might find in a place like this, the Night Gallery. We're most pleased that you've seen fit to visit us here. As usual, we're doing business at the old stand, or on the same wires, if you will. Because our stock in trade is paintings, all sorts of paintings. Charming little still lifes, and on a few occasions, a few still deaths. Now, check this one, if you will. Strips of ethereal night clouds as seen from the vantage point of a square acre of tombstones. And the face of a neutral onlooker who surveys the silence. Well, perhaps not quite total silence, because the name of our painting is Whisper. And it tells the story of one body inhabited by two people. And at a point, as you can well imagine, this gets crowded. And if this one doesn't ice up the old spine, we'll send you one of our official apologies, along with the body. That's the kind of guarantee you get in the Night Gallery. Good evening. The paintings you see on display are designed to lift you from the ordinary. They're collected from all over the world and brought here by train, jet, and hearse, carefully crated and packed with protective covering, and often with their native earth. We call your attention to this gentle facial study with the one visible intriguing eye and the wind-blown hair. And to those of you whose visual acuity is perhaps better than most, you'll note the skulls that one eye is contemplating. This painting is called Doll of Death, and it tells a story that takes place in the West Indies, where the ancient art of voodoo is still practiced and celebrated. Now, if you don't believe in voodoo, you can take this with a grain of salt. On the other hand, if you find yourself dancing to that distant drummer, and the drum seems to beckon, check for missing pins and brand new dolls. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Night Gallery. For the benefit of those of you who are perhaps still uninitiated into this particular arm of art, this is a special display. Now, anyone can show you a Rembrandt or a Picasso or a Jackson Pollock, but we dig much deeper with our paintings, frequently 6 feet underground, as is the case with this painting. It's called Hatred Unto Death, and it makes comment on the fact that there are certain anthropologists and psychologists who hold the conviction that blood memories are passed along in the genes. You scratch the surface of the 20th century man, and you uncover a Neanderthal. Now, if we're to accept this theory, it suggests a kind of unending reincarnation. But if man has a Mr. Hyde perpetually struggling deep within him, what lies beneath the surface of the lower beasts? We offer neither a postulate nor a promise. We simply suggest that you watch and listen. This is the Night Gallery. It's a measure of our current mores that we base an economy on a credit plan. We do things on time, so to speak. Purchase the item, use it while you're paying it off. And this sets up the intriguing premise of this painting, in which the faith between seller and buyer is the ultimate. It's called Die Now, Pay Later. As usual, following the course of the old switcheroo on Night Gallery, a painting called Room for One Less. A bizarre little item here offered to the gourmet who takes his banquet seriously. If sometime you're invited to a picnic under the moon, you might best check the other guests. The ones who didn't arrive in automobiles. Who, as a matter of fact, parked their brooms in the corner of the meadow. This little nocturnal clown bake is called Witch's Feast.